We're all set.
Okay, let's go ahead and call this July 6, 2021 Planning Commission session to order. Can we do a roll call, please?
Yes, and I'll take roll. Commissioner Romine.
Here.
Commissioner Stepp.
Here.
Vice Chairperson O'Day.
Here.
Commissioner Richards.
Here.
Commissioner Howden.
Here.
Commissioner Lloyd. Commissioner LeBlanc.
Here.
Commissioner Nichols.
Here.
Chairperson Davis. Alderwoman Denham.
Here.
9 members present. We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. First item on the agenda is for public comment. This would be anything unrelated to any agenda items that we have for today. So this would be an opportunity for anybody in the public to speak related to anything that is outside of what's on our agenda. Nothing? No? Okay, we'll move on to the regular agenda. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the Planning Commission meetings from the May 4th, 2021 regular meeting. Take a minute to review if you haven't already. If you have any comments, questions, concerns related to those minutes would be great. If not, I will accept
Motion.
a motion. Yes, sorry.
I move to accept the minutes as written.
I second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed, same. Okay, motion carries.
Motion carries.
Second item on the agenda is the request for municipal code amendment to chapter 94 zoning. Joel, can you take it over from here?
Yes, I can.
This on it?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So as you said, this is a request for municipal code amendments to Chapter 94 zoning. So we had updated the zoning code, or as we call them, our development code standards, over the last handful of years. The first one was done in December of 2016, and then we did subsequent updates in April of 2018 for the landscaping and subdivision standards, and then our sign standards in September of 2019. These three significant changes were a result of the Community Plan 2030, which really gave us the direction that our zoning code, our development codes needed to be modernized. They need to be updated. And so we definitely went through that effort of doing so. However, we knew when they were adopted that they weren't perfect, that there was going to be times like this where we would catch a couple of things just from simply using the code on the street, if you will. So we have a couple of those for you tonight, as well as some other changes that we're recommending at this time. What I'm going to do next is pull over those changes, and we can go through them kind of one by one. I don't have a formal presentation. It's really meant to kind of go through these with you all. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please stop me after I present it, and we can kind of do these one by one if that works for you all. So the first section here is in Article 1. Article 1 really lays out the development code, including the definitions, which are in Section 94-5. This particular definition for canopy, you'll notice the change that we're proposing is simply to remove carports from the definition. If you were to look at the definition of carports, having it included in the definition of canopy simply just doesn't make sense. It's contradictory. This canopy definition is a carryover from the sign code, and so once it got dropped in the zoning code, it really, as I said, it didn't need to have carports included. So pretty simple change, we'd categorize it for this one. Next, we're moving into Article 2. These are our rules and regulations, a little bit broader rules for some of the things we do, particularly with our zoning districts and when we zone property. This is actually a result of something that we got direction from the Board of Aldermen on. We had an applicant that proposed to rezone a property several times. And so the language, while it was being followed, we wanted to clean it up and tighten it up. And so we believe we've done that here with this change. And you'll see the change, again, being bolded and underlined, and then what's being removed with the brackets and the strikeout. So I'm not going to read the whole section there under C2, but essentially what we're doing is we're not allowing a reapplication of a zoning request to be filed less than 60 days following a denial. Moving on, then in our subdivision section, these are very simple comments. There was a period, or I'm sorry, a comma. It needed to be a semicolon in this particular one on line 32. Going down then on line 42, we simply left off the letter D on read, so we wanted to be sure we got that in there. Then moving to section 9410, land disturbance. So before I get into the change that you'll see most out of this section, I just want to highlight the one here on through line 53 through 57. There had been a requirement for an applicant to provide 3 sets of plans for a land disturbance permit. Because we have citizen serve now, that's all been done electronically, so there's no need for the applicant to provide paper copies anymore. So this is really just cleaning up as we're already accepting electronic work from our applicants. So we just wanted to be sure that code was clear about that we're not requiring them to bring paper down in combination with applying on citizen serve. Next, getting into, and this goes on for at least a couple of pages, so I'll just kind of hold here on line 58, 59. When the land disturbance code was written and approved, it was really under the authority of the Public Works Director. And the reason that is because our stormwater coordinator was a staff person of that department. And that staff person was the most knowledgeable in this area of clearing, land disturbance, stormwater, so on and so forth. However, again, based on some direction we've gotten from the Board of Aldermen recently due to some projects, we strategically as staff moved that position into the Planning and Development Department. And that way it could be more seamless with development activities that land disturbance was initiated in the Planning and Development Department, which would then lead into the building permit process and then into inspections. So we just felt like it was a good way to address this concern in the community and be able to kind of take a clear look at the process and make sure it's being followed to the T just as code's written, because we do believe the code is solid. We do believe the code does what it needs to for this area. It just needs to, we need to be sure we're following the code. So that is why this change has been made, to memorialize that change of staff from the Public Works Department to the Planning and Development Department.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
If we're going to make any suggestions or request amendments to this, are we going to do it all at the end, or are we going to do it as we go through each section for discussion purposes?
It's up to you all. I'm happy to entertain either one. I might add that if we do have a fair amount of amendments, we can definitely jot those down, and we'd be happy to simply bring this back to you all next month instead of trying to do them on the fly. That way we can be sure they're done correctly. We have the chance for the city attorney to review those as well. And it's always a challenge writing code on the fly. So we'd be happy to take them down if we have a lot and come back to you next month.
No, I think this is great, and I'm glad everything's going to go through planning development. I know you put a lot of hard work into this. And this is just my suggestion,
Sure.
thoughts. However, you want to take a draft amendment. When the item comes to Board of Aldermen, instead of us having to go through and ask, what was waived and why was something waived, and I'm just throwing this out, I am not an attorney, so I've just put this verbiage together, but the thought behind it was each item waived shall be documented to include the reason for requirement waiver and shall become a permanent document in the application file, so that anytime the Board of Aldermen needs to know or someone wants to go back into the file to see, we'll know exactly why each item was waived and why it was waived, because sometimes that's unclear and it makes it difficult to make a decision.
So a suggestion that was just made by the city attorney here on line 60 would be to have this sentence read, "The planning and development director may grant the request for a waiver in writing upon determining that the item to be waived is not applicable to the project review," so on and so forth. Just so that it's stated in code that the director has to provide that in writing, and then if it's the board's desire for that to be presented to you all, or, I mean, we can definitely do that, but at least we can get it into code that it has to be provided in writing and documented in the file.
For each item that is waived.
Sure, yep.
Thank you.
Perfect. Any other comments on this particular section?
Sure. I was going to wait till the end, but as long as we're right here on lines 55 to 57, the purpose was to make sure folks know they don't have to present paper anymore, but can they still? Is that an option?
No, actually, it's not.
Can only
Yeah,
apply
I mean,
electronically.
in order for the system to work as it's intended to be, to get it around to our reviewers, it needs to be provided electronically. Most design firms, professional firms, they'd prefer that. They do prefer that. However, we do still have people that come into City Hall with pieces of paper, and our staff works with those individuals when they want to submit a request, and we have a couple of iPads at our front counter, and so we can take a photo of their drawing or their picture or whatever, and then help them with that process to get it uploaded. So we work with them, but we get to the same point, which is electronic information, so that it can be distributed to all the reviewers.
That's the answer to the question, just that if people are not ready, able,
Sure.
or have the knowledge to electronically transfer the documents, they can walk in down here and have some help.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, Joel, do we need a motion to add what Alderwoman Denham is referring to?
I think what we'll do, if it's okay with you all, is we'll keep track of these changes and then kind of gauge where we're at the end of the discussion and decide at that point if it's worth making these changes, bringing it back to you, or if we can make a motion at that time for all the changes, if that
Okay.
works for you all. All right, so we've got line 60 written down. Okay, perfect. Just want to be sure. All right. With that, then, I'm just going to pass by all these changes, which again is simply from Public Works to Planning and Development Director under the land disturbance. And that gets us then to quite a few of those. Told you it was a few pages. So that gets us to line 235. So under Article 3, we have a section about annexation. We again wanted to clarify some things. First, under subsection A, we had just the letter A there, so we wanted to make sure that it was clear that that was the agricultural district. And then on this line 236, where it talks about plan intent, Missouri state statutes refers to the plan of intent under an involuntary annexation process, not an annexation process. So we wanted to make sure we were consistent with the Missouri state statutes on that part of the code. And then next we added B, or are proposing to add B, under line 238 and 239, and this reads that any permit provided under this chapter shall not be issued until final approval of annexation has been provided by the board. So this would be, any zoning permit, this would be any land disturbance permit. It would all be covered and not allowed until that property is completely annexed into the city. So this will prevent jobs from getting out before the annexation process. Yes?
And that's great, and thank you for getting both of those in. But, and that would be great for clearing of property if there was an actual application that was pulled. But because we've had a few projects where voluntary annexation paperwork is submitted and there is at a minimum 6 weeks before final approval, and that is the area which there is a huge concern. And so I would like to suggest that we add a C, and just what I put together, but I feel really needs to be addressed, is all annexation agreements shall include verbiage stating that the applicant agrees that no clearing of any portion of the legally described property listed on the agreement shall be cleared between the date of document submission through the final date of ordinance through board approval, because that period is still not addressed. And we need to put a stop to property being cleared when the county says it's the city's responsibility and the city says it's the county's responsibility. So some very clear verbiage for that would be suggested. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we feel like that's addressed in B. I'm looking under the land disturbance code as well. And it's, it's very clear that you cannot remove vegetation, you cannot disturb the ground on a property until you have a land disturbance permit. And then this is saying you can't be issued that permit until you're annexed. So I guess I'm
Okay.
trying to make sure we get the dots connected for you.
Okay, yes, this was pretty much the thought process in the past.
Right?
Yes, you need to be fully annexed and finally approved
Correct.
in order to clear land.
Correct.
But we know what happens because of the last few projects. There have been many, but just taking the last couple of projects. Country Bluff Estate, the property next to Country Bluff Estates, property Friendly Hills. There is that interim time where the county says it's the city's responsibility and vice versa, and the fingers just go like that. And so to clear that and to ensure that this does not take place in the future, I do not believe that B will cover this, because no permit was pulled at the city anyways, and they did go through the county, but still did not pay any attention to DNR or EPA or whatever. It was just a huge mess. So there are developers that will go and do that, and we need to be able to enforce it at the city level. We want to be able to annex properties in. We love to invite people to annex their properties into the city. However, we need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves, protecting the surrounding properties.
And the onus is definitely on the staff, right? We need to do a better job of communicating at that critical time when someone petitions the city for annexation, to reach out to the county to understand what the status is of that property, and let them know that a petition has been filed with the city at that point, and defining that clarity of, when it's the county's responsibility and when the city needs to take responsibility of it. And at least this bridges that gap that nothing should happen during that interim time of the annexation process.
I don't feel that this is clear enough to bridge that gap.
Okay.
I believe we need to have some strong verbiage, and that the person annexing the property in has to be aware of their responsibilities as well. And I believe this needs to be in writing, and they need to agree to this before we even accept their application to annex.
Okay. Well, we can take a look on it. That may
Thank you.
be one that takes a little bit longer time.
All right,
for
thank
us.
you. Mhm.
The next section is building types. This was, first, it looks like quite a bit of change, but what we're doing is relocating the building types section. It had been, if you bear with me here, I'm gonna scroll kind of fast, but I'll come back, I promise. So it had been, you see all these tables, and then you see all of the building types here. So it had been after our tables of development standards for the different districts. And so we're simply picking it up and relocating it into the front, because they very much come into the code as somewhat definitions for each building type. For instance, this first table, Table 94-48-1, simply shows what each structure is and what district it's allowed in. And then we go into each actual structure with an image to really kind of get everybody's frame of mindset of when we're talking about, for instance, the detached single-family dwelling, what it is in writing and what it looks like in a picture. So thanks to our city attorney's guidance, we felt it was more appropriate before we actually get into the details of what those actual developmental standards are for each district. So once we get through those, then we get to each district has a dimensional standard table. And within these tables, it lists if there's a minimum lot size requirement for each lot, a front setback, a side setback, a side street setback, a rear setback, and a max height. And so, again, we're not recommending much change in these. I'll go through them. When you see under structure type a change, what we're doing there is we're simply making sure that the name of the structure type matches what it is called up above. In the code, we don't want to present two different words for one thing. We don't want to cause confusion. We want to provide clarity for consistency in the code. So that's what we have done in these development tables as you go through them, and you see any change again in the structure type column is just to make sure those things are matching. In the low density, I'll point out another change that you'll see in some of these tables. So it's always been allowed in code to have a 2-unit single-family dwelling district. However, there haven't been standards provided in the dimensional standards. So we had a use table that was saying something was allowed, but we had no standards. So it became really difficult for staff to enforce. So simply what we had done in these instances was we had borrowed over the district standards. Let me see if I can find one. So for instance, under neighborhood commercial, where detached single-family dwelling and 2-unit single-family dwelling were allowed, we brought over the standards from the high-density residential district here and just copied those over because the intent for density and all that was the same. And so that was really the accomplished goal of what we were trying to do in these dimensional standard tables.
I'd like to just ask, why is residential being stricken?
Because again, it's to match the term. So if we go up to the structure type, it's listed here as detached single-family dwelling, 2-unit single-family dwelling, attached single-family dwelling, and all of these titles match the definitions in 94.5. So it just was that last round of editing when we were finalizing the code that the two terms weren't looked at and made sure they were consistent through the code. So it's just a cleanup to, again, make sure the definition matches the structure type, matches the dimensional tables, that it's consistent throughout.
Okay, I don't know, there's just a few people here in the audience, but citywide, I believe that the majority of our citizens that have purchased single-family, residential dwelling, one family, their zoning districts were changed. The city of Branson no longer has single-family residential zoning. There is no more protection for single-family residential zoning. So I know I'm in a single-family residentially zoned area, and my entire neighborhood is up in arms about this. So I would propose that we have further discussion on removing, separating, going back to the single-family residential zoning and having that a part of this. A lot of citizens feel this is a land taking. It devalues the property because, say, we're in a nice estate area that has 1-acre parcels. There can be up to 6 dwelling units on 1 acre. and there's absolutely no protection. Not only does it totally change the character of that subdivision, it also, if you can go up to 6 dwelling units, it's also going to take your parking up. So where there used to be 2 cars, and that's a minimum because most people have teenagers and they have cars too. So you're going to either double or triple the amount of cars that are going to be in that driveway. The infrastructure where the single-family dwellings are is not set up to double or triple water, sewer, traffic. So many things come into play. And now, as an example, we're having to take city taxpayer dollars to update infrastructure because we are increasing density where it wasn't before. And even if someone has an HOA, POA, we are then making citizens who are innocent, who have purchased in a single-family residential area, and they believed in the protection that the city was providing for them in that single-family area, now they're going to be required just to hold on to their property owners' agreement. They're going to have to get an attorney, and they're going to have to be the victim to try to protect their own property rights. It's just, it's not ethical, it's not logical, it's not fair. And I've had a lot of complaints, I am passing them on, and this is just at the minor level. So I'd like to see if we can do something, what we can do to bring that single-family zoning back in to protect the properties, so this doesn't have to turn into a major concern, because it is a concern.
So just some background on I guess the evolution of the code and where we are today. The Community Plan 2030 and many members of the community over the past decade or so, particularly during the economic times, interest to have greater housing flexibility and options, particularly mother-in-law suites or rental units above their garage, for instance, as that being an option in our core neighborhoods. Our core neighborhoods do not allow nightly rentals, and the community has held strong on that, and I think that's a great thing. It really protects our neighborhoods. But having housing flexibility in the low-density residential district offers that opportunity if people would like to add a mother-in-law suite or another unit to their property. They have the ability to do so. We don't have people that are actively seeking that out. We don't have people that are looking to demolish existing structures and build 2-unit residential structures, but the opportunity is there if people want to pursue it. The other thing I just really quickly wanted to touch on was in the low-density residential district dimensional standards. I know the mention of the 6 dwelling units per acre, so that's a max. That's the maximum allowable units per acre. Somebody would have to purchase, as your example, an acre lot, and then they would have to subdivide it into 6 units. However, they'd still have to meet that minimum lot size, the minimum lot width, and all the setbacks to be able to do that, whereas the minimum is that 0.5 units per acre. One of the other things that came out of the Community Plan 2030 was we want to be very leery of our city limits growing further and further out, because the cost of extending our city limits for police, fire, sewer, water is far greater than taking advantage of existing infrastructure. And yes, there may be needs to repair outdated systems or upgrade systems to certain levels. But again, the cost of doing that far outweighs, or is far less than the cost it would be to extend those services further and further and further out. So the only way to accomplish that is to create some allowances for increased density. And again, not everybody has to take advantage of those opportunities, but they're in code if people choose to.
Right, and I think it's a good idea to look at worst-case scenario, because usually worst-case scenario happens. So if someone knows that they see this coming and they want to go ahead and put 2 dwelling in the code, and I don't have the perfect verbiage, but it's got to look like it's one single-family residential piece of property, but you have 2 entrances and exits, you're gonna have 2 addresses. You're going, I mean, people are gonna max out. You're gonna have to have all the extra parking for the cars. It's close to a property taking, and the reason I say that, I don't, people are not aware. I have talked to people, I love the door knocking thing. I have talked to my neighbors. They're not aware. Most people are not aware. And I believe that it would be wise on our part to make sure that we provide that protection for our citizens and make sure that we protect them and have the single-family zoning back in our ordinances.
I mean, we're here to hear from you all. It's your all's direction, so we're happy to
Okay.
to listen to your direction.
I've heard strongly, and I'm sure this will just be the beginning, not the end, of the concerns that those property rights have been taken away, and it was done, it was not explained fully. Nobody received anything in the mail that I'm aware of, the people that I've talked to. Yeah, there were some advertising, but most people don't get it. If an electrician put out all these codes, and I would just be like, oh, okay, because I don't understand. But we do understand, so I feel it's our responsibility to make sure that we explain to our citizens, because our citizens' job is not sitting home reading code, dissecting it, understanding it. They shouldn't have to. We should be protecting them, and that's my opinion on that.
Joel, is this a clear understanding of what's happening here, what she's describing?
I guess from staff standpoint, we know why it's in there and the thought behind it. And so again, we're open to discussion from you all and direction from you all.
So what she's saying is that if you bought a home in a single dwelling residential neighborhood, with the proposed changes, now you could subdivide you'd actually have to subdivide the real estate in order to add these units? You'd
No.
simply have to split your lot so that each building you built on the lot
No,
conformed to the lot size and setbacks.
So the 2-unit single-family dwelling allows, just as it states, the ability for 2 families to live separately from each other on one property. So a single property, 1 property, 2 families. And again, that's to create the opportunity for like a family, and then to have like a mother-in-law suite with a mother-in-law living separately from that family, meaning that person would have their own kitchen, their own bathroom, their own bedroom, separate from that family. That's just one example. It could also just be a studio unit that they rent out to, a friend or, to anybody.
Commissioner Nichols, duplex, they're duplexes. Duplexes would be allowed on single family. So if you live in an area that you bought into feeling that you were protected by single family zoning, duplex can be put right next door to you.
This change occurs with this language? This isn't something that was previously written into the code?
It has always been in the code. It has been in the code since it was updated in 2016.
Okay. Thank you.
Going through these tables again.
Can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So forgive my naivete here, but if we just changed, Ruth, if I can ask a question of Ruth, if that's okay, is your concern that the word residential is stricken? Is that your concern in the code, that they're striking?
No,
Okay,
that was just a question I had. Why are we removing the word residential from it's from single family?
So it's just the term, it's dwelling is the definition versus residence or residential. So dwelling is the term used throughout the code. So just trying to be consistent. That's why the word residential is being removed. It's purely to match the terms. It has no ulterior motive or ulterior intent behind it. It's just to match
Sure.
terms. The definitions of those terms are remaining unchanged.
would it be just maybe less heartburn or concern if on the descriptions that you were trying to match to. If you just made the table that we're looking at, that we were just looking at with, that showed the lot area and the density, et cetera, match the language that was up above instead of changing the language that's up above.
So the definitions are what we're trying to match to in 94-5. So if we wanted to kind of retool all the definitions, so instead of saying, as instance on the screen, line 259, detached single-family dwelling, if the preference would be for that to say detached single-family residence or residential, then we can make that change. We just need to make more changes to the rest of the code. Wherever that word dwelling appears, we need to change that to residential or residential. Yeah, it would definitely
Yeah.
have to take, yeah, sure.
So what
Okay.
was the thought process, if I may, sorry?
Yeah,
thank
hang on just a
Does
second.
Attorney Lebec have a microphone?
I do not. We have,
We're smushed over here.
yeah.
Sorry, Chuck.
Commissioner Nichols, what I was trying to say is, again, legislating on the fly, no good comes from it. I think we know this from history. Small changes tonight, great, fantastic, happy to accommodate. But if we're looking to go into a more deeper dive into basically re-engineering everything here before us, I would strongly recommend, again, this is your call, this is the chair's call, I'd strongly recommend us looking at postponing this, getting our thoughts to paper, so that staff has an opportunity to properly codify this and bring it back before the board. That's all I'm trying to say.
So the definition currently under 94-5 for dwelling means any building or portion thereof which is designed or used exclusively for residential purposes. So residential is built into that definition of dwelling, and we use dwelling because we're talking about structures, building types versus, where somebody lives.
Okay, just for conversation here, not suggesting anything, I definitely agree with Mr. Lebec stating that we put this off so we have more time for discussion. But through previous discussions, we have LDR, MDR, HDR.
Correct.
In between the egg and the LDR, we should have single-family residential, and we should put things back in their proper place so that we provide the protection for our citizens I would like it for myself as well.
I guess we would simply recommend that instead of adding another district, that if that change is desired, that we could remove that one development type from low-density residential so that it would solely be then the only use allowed would be single-family dwellings. If that's your all's desire.
There's single-family and there's two-family. There's two-family/duplex. There's single-family, and that's where we need the division. We need to protect the single-family. Because most people, that's the biggest asset they have is their home.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I guess, I think it warrants further discussion, Ruth. I think you raised some really concerning points, and I'm just kind of catching up with some of the verbiage that's being used here, because it's a little confusing for me when I see two-unit, single-family dwelling. I'm like, why don't you just call it a two-unit dwelling or a duplex? But maybe that's just me. But anyway, I'd be more than happy to work with you, Ruth, or at least to see on paper what it is that you think needs to be resolved.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Joel, based on the consensus of a couple of the commissioners, it probably makes sense for us to at least look at reviewing this further with you guys. What would be the next steps for us to do that? Would it be?
Well,
that-
so again, there's a couple options. We can continue going through it and then summarize the points that have been made tonight. We can then, if you all are comfortable, make a decision to move forward with what we have. And if there's something you want to bring back separately, we could do that. Or we could postpone the entire thing and add to it. It just depends, again, what your comfort level is with what's being presented tonight.
I think this is just my belief, my opinion, just based on what I'm hearing. I believe that if we continue to go through it, we're gonna be here all night.
Agreed.
I think the best thing is probably for us to come up with some sort of a way for each of the commissioners to send their comments, notes, what have you, into you and Attorney Liebeck, and figure out what those would be associated with this, and then bring it back possibly, well, I guess not next month because the agenda's already set.
No,
No.
we're good up
Okay.
until
So
posting.
potentially next month, if not next month, then the month after.
Chairperson, that's kind of the vehicle we've been using with the animal code. We've put it out to all the members of the board that if there's any substantive changes they want, to get them to basically administration so that we can have those changes ready to basically be written into the potential animal code. So I think that vehicle is a good vehicle to accommodate, so we're not in a situation here where we're making bad law, trying to make good law, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Correct. Yep. Is it possible for us to review those things in advance, or would it have to be reviewed at the meeting?
Well, so we posted and notified you all of this item
Right.
on Wednesday at noon, last Wednesday at noon. So since then, it's been out there for review. It's up to you all. We're here to serve you guys.
Okay.
I mean, again, we've gone through, well, to be completely clear here, we've gotten through 497 lines. So, I mean, I think we've made good progress tonight. If it's your alls, I would not mind finishing to go through it at least, to touch on everything, to give everybody at least a good sense of where we are and what we're proposing and why. And then, you know, there may only be one or two things to react to, and we've at least gone through everything, so we don't have to hopefully spend as much time in the future. And maybe if at the end of this discussion we find out it's only one or two things, that will help us all kind of focus a little bit more on what needs to be done.
Does the commission agree with that?
Yeah, it would be my opinion, personally, as an individual commissioner, that we finish this next 125 lines, and then I'd like to see it postponed, due attention from staff to the items that were brought up, and then we could cover it with more aplomb. And perhaps between now and then, concerns could be submitted in writing, so staff has a good idea of the changes, or at least the questions about the code that we're suggesting, or at least considering.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that.
Through the rest of it before we end up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
we're almost there.
Yep.
So how I skipped so much, just to catch everybody up, as we had mentioned, we relocated the building type section to the beginning. So all this is just crossouts of when we relocated that. So just trying to make sure it didn't seem like we were skipping over a bunch. So that gets us down here to section 94-49 under use dimensional standards. This was kind of just another cleanup under the patio home. It was an option that existed. However, if you read the regulation on 502 or 503, it doesn't match what the definition of a patio home. So a patio home, if you can picture it, it's literally when two residential structures are built wall to wall next to each other. So it's impossible for a structure connected to another structure to have a side setback on either side of 5 feet. So instead, the way it needed to be presented was as we're proposing for, to make sure at least one of the side setbacks is no less than the 10 feet. And that's how you achieve the setback. So if you had two units together, 10 feet on either side, you're achieving the proper dimensional standard for a patio home.
Like we were doing at the Sienna's.
Exactly, yep, exactly. Sienna is the tried and true example of patio homes in the community.
Yep.
So just real quick, to make sure, again, we're all on the same page talking about the same things. A patio home is where you have a residential structure and essentially a property line down the middle of it. So they're two separate properties, but it looks like one structure from the street, but two entrances. Whereas a 2-unit or a duplex, as it's being referred to, that's 2 units on a single property, a single parcel. So that's the difference between a 2-unit and a patio home. And patio homes are not allowed in low-density residential, just to kind of come full circle on that. So then getting into the uses, this is one that we've actually just been talking about here under the table of permitted uses. So it has been in the use table as a single-family duplex, again, to make sure our terms are consistent throughout the Chapter 94, changing that from duplex to 2-unit. But as you can see, we're not suggesting or recommending any changes to where it's allowed in the community. However, under group living for shelter care facilities, you may recall we dealt with an applicant back, I think it was October, wanted to do a shelter care facility in the downtown, and it required them to do a special use permit as the property was zoned neighborhood commercial. As you all got to talking and asked where other shelter care facilities would be allowed, it was mentioned that community commercial was a permitted use district. And the commission gave us direction to make the change that any shelter care facility within the community should be required to have a special use permit. That way we can address things like distances, proximity to residential, all of those things that you all care deeply about. So we're finally bringing this change, something that's been out there for a few months at the very least. Then into accessory use standards. So this happens to be for outdoor seating on site on line 524. So the entertainment district primarily is the 76 Country Boulevard corridor. When the code was first adopted, there was a 0 front setback for properties in the 76 entertainment district. And so this regulation made sense that you could have outdoor seating areas that were adjacent to your buildings, and they had to meet building setback. Well, with a 0 setback, you could take full advantage of your properties on 76 by having outdoor seating all the way up to essentially the sidewalk. However, as the CID district evolved and the code has evolved, now there's a 25-foot front setback in the entertainment district. So it's limited quite extensively someone's opportunity to have outdoor seating within that district, which is, again, contradictory to what we're trying to accomplish in that entertainment district, which is more activity, more excitement, closer to the road. And so this was one of those, oops, when we made that change, just as Attorney Beck mentioned earlier, we missed this one, which is we didn't want to stifle that opportunity in the entertainment district. So all we're simply doing is trying to call out that while you have to respect your building setback requirements in the zoning districts, when you're in the entertainment district, you can utilize the full potential of your property.
Could I ask if this is specifically why, this may be too specific, but why Chimmy's food truck is not allowed to have outdoor seating? Are they too close to the road for the current setback?
So with food trucks, there's a code requirement that if you don't have public restrooms available on your property, you can't provide public seating. So in other words, you're not inviting guests to stay if you don't have the building code requirements for restrooms.
Separate issue.
Yep. So if he had restrooms, he could provide seating.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And it has to be on his property. It can't be a adjacent property.
Right. And they have to be permanent built restrooms,
Right.
not
That's
temporary.
correct. That's correct.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Off-street parking, so this, a couple different reasons why we're making the changes that are being proposed here. One, we've had, particularly in commercial areas, talks with developers about different types of addressing parking lot paving instead of just asphalt and concrete. We do have the opportunity for interlocking paver stones, but as you see, it was limited to concrete. So we've proposed to strike the type of paver stone and simply add the language that it's designed for vehicular use. So there may be some other type of material out there in the world that you could interlock together to use for parking. It doesn't have to be limited to concrete. It just needs to be made sure it handles vehicles. That's our biggest concern. And then on line 538 through 540, this is really kind of expanding the opportunity for creativity. There may be some treatment out there that we are unfamiliar with, but if an engineer says that it has the same structural and maintenance characteristics of a parking lot as asphalt and concrete, then by all means, we think that that should be an option and an opportunity. Again, the idea of modernizing our code is to create options for folks. So again, it does put onus on them to make sure that it provides the same similar structural and maintenance characteristics of the things listed above, and it does have to get approved by the Planning and Development Director. So those are for non-residential or commercial development. And similarly then for residential development, we've added the interlocker paving stones because we've had several people ask for that as an opportunity for their driveway, just to kind of dress it up a little bit, do it a little bit more unique of a finish. Again, making sure it's put in place for vehicular use. And also we've added the words including driveways there on 556, line 556. This is from a Board of Adjustment case that recently was decided where there was some discussion about required parking being paved and what is required parking for residential structures. And the Board of Adjustment did confirm that a driveway is part of the required parking and therefore must be paved with one of these options. It could not be an unpaved surface within the city limits of Branson. So we're just kind of memorializing that decision, as well as I mentioned, the additional opportunity there with C under line 560. Getting into landscaping and screening, which is Article 7. Simply under line, or next to line 575 and line 576, current code just mentions that vegetation should be planted adjacent to solid walls to soften the effect of the wall and to deter graffiti. Where this is actually where it talks about walls is in the screening and buffering section later in the chapter. So again, just trying to be consistent through the code. And really the intent here, as it says, is to soften the effect of the wall and deter graffiti. Well, a screen is very much a wall or a fence, and it doesn't say shall, code says should. So it's not a requirement that you have to install vegetation, it's just encouraging people to do so to deter graffiti and soften the effect of that wall. Then on line 580, this is a pretty simple fix. Just the language, when you read it out, it wasn't quite what it needed to be, where it says a minimum of 1 1/2 inch caliper there, with the 1 1/2 being numbers and the 1 being words. It just seemed like a lot going on there. So we simplified it by removing the numbers and just having it read a minimum of 1 1/2 inch caliper, which we believe is just the same intent, just making it a little bit more clear for a person reading it. And then signs, we have just a wrong word that was put here in 597. It said for. When you read it, it makes complete sense. It needs to be more, not for. And then moving down to line 609, 610. So this was a practice that we had utilized in the past to help our code enforcement officers do their job a little bit more efficiently. If you got a temporary sign, you were handed a couple of stickers, you put them on, and then code enforcement was able to know if it was an allowed sign or not. Now with Citizen Serve, we no longer need those permit stickers, and code enforcement has direct access to all temporary sign requests. So when they're patrolling, they can pull up an address, see if they have a sign allowed or not. It's still they're still able to do their jobs. It's just we're not handing out permit stickers anymore. So we just didn't want to have that in code requiring staff to do something that they no longer need to do. And with that, we're to the final proposed change. Again, it looks like a lot, but really, if you read through it, we are not changing anything other than we are relocating the signage fees from Chapter 70 to Chapter 94 where they belong. This was one, again, as was pointed out earlier, when you do these kind of things, you forget something. This was a forgotten code change when we did the sign code a couple years ago. Embarrassed that it's taken us this long to fix this, so we're glad to finally have the opportunity to do so. And the only other one to highlight is there at 94-6 zoning request application, that being completely stricken out. That's because as you read code, when you annex, you automatically become agricultural zoning. So there is never an opportunity for someone to request zoning. They are always making a change to zoning because, again, the agriculture is set when you annex. So there's no need for that permit application, there's no need for that fee. So we were just cleanly striking it because there's no need for it. So with that, those are our proposed changes. Happy to answer any additional questions or anything we can do.
Okay. Does any of the commissioners have any additional questions or comments for Joel?
I saved mine to submit in writing for consideration. Thank you.
So yeah, with that, we're glad to take whatever direction. If you want to, someone wishes to make a postponement, a motion to postpone to our next planning commission meeting in August, or if you want to try and work our way through it, it's your all's pleasure.
I'd like to move that we postpone this to the next appropriate meeting, and I believe we decided that was the next upcoming meeting.
We do have an item for our August agenda, so we're happy to add it to that agenda.
And my motion would include to allow the commissioners time to submit in writing items for further discussion.
We have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by raising your right hand.
Motion carries.
Opposed? Same sign? Okay, motion carries. Anything from Joel, anything in regards to reports?
No, just happy to be in the same room with all you guys again. It's good to see you all again in person. Appreciate your patience and your willingness to adapt to the times that we had and doing virtual meetings. But I think we finally started getting the hang of it there after a while, and we're able to still conduct business for our citizens and our community members. So appreciate your all's patience and efforts through that time.
Right back at you. Appreciate everything you guys did to make that happen, Joel.
Absolutely.
From all of us.
For sure, sure.
Is the public supposed to be able to make comments here, or no?
Public comment was actually at the beginning.
For the
of
public hearing on the item that was on the agenda?
There was a
Like-
motion to
Like they
post.
do at Board of Aldermen, I
No,
don't know, I thought
there was a
public
motion to
hearing.
postpone before it was any opportunity for public comment.
What's that process be like, Joel?
Can't we introduce a motion to withdraw the postponement motion?
Attorney Liebeck?
I'm looking. This is a new one.
Would an amendment to the motion simply serve, and we would vote on amendment to allow public discussion before we vote on the amendment,
I mean,
on the motion to postpone?
The issue at this point is you've already made a motion, you've already seconded it, you've already voted on it. Motion's
Oh,
carried.
that's
It's
right, we
done.
already passed the motion.
It's done.
It's
Yep.
that- it's that simple.
I mean, you could always end the meeting, adjourn the meeting, and have a discussion.
Yeah.
It's
And get
up
the
to you.
feedback then,
Yeah.
and then use that as an opportunity to garner some comments so that we can bring this back before you. And I think that's, the end goal here is to get what you want written before you for consideration. And if there's members of the public here that want to voice some concerns, provide some input, let's visit with them and get that information from them.
Well, will that be recorded for public comment, or will it be,
Once the meeting's adjourned, then.
it won't be
would-
recorded
It
at
would no
all?
longer be recorded.
So their comments wouldn't be broadcast to the public, but they'd be able to make them to us as commissioners, any of them that wanted to stay and hear the comments.
That's correct.
Correct.
Yeah, I find a lot of valuable input from public comments, and I was kind of surprised when they didn't speak on top of the meeting, so they haven't taken the time to come down here and express their opinions. I, for one, would stay after the meeting and listen.
As would I.
Is
that-
the procedure, the normal procedure is though to, after we're through with this, before a motion's made, is to ask the commission if they have any comments, and then just ask the public if they have any comments before a motion's made. Is that the normal procedure?
Yes, and I apologize, that's on me. This is the very first meeting I've ever sat up here and had to run, so I apologize. And I found out about it about 5 minutes before we walked in here,
I
so
mean,
100% my fault, but I would be happy to sit here and.
Chairperson, if
yeah.
we want to, I mean, again, there's no harm, no foul. If you want to let the public speak, let the public speak. I mean, we know this is already postponed.
So can I let them speak on the record then?
I mean, Chairman, you control the quorum, so it's up to you.
Okay, well, I'd be happy to hear your guys' comments if that's the case. So are we required to get name,
Yeah, so-
address, everything is similar to Board
Yeah,
of Alderman meeting?
We have a sign-in sheet down there, so anybody speaking, if you could just print your name, your address, your information, that way we can make sure we get it in the record correctly of who spoke.
Again, I apologize.
Hi, my name is Susie Sutherland, and I live at 110 Country Bluff Drive in Branson. And I'm here to really speak to the document that you just reviewed. And there's two areas that I have grave concerns on, and I really want to make sure that that I get to express at least my opinion and pretty much the opinion of a lot of people that I've spoken to. The first one is the zoning designations. Quite honestly, the only reason that I found out about all this change in the designations was because the developer of the property beside us bought a lot in Country Bluff. And it had to be annexed into the city. And I didn't understand that because the rest of the development had already been annexed into the city. So doing the checking, in doing my checking, I found out that at the time that the Mass group came into the city, that the state was funding a particular portion of it, and they needed to make sure that it was done in a time frame just then. So information was sent to all the residents of Country Bluff, and the people who responded as approving, they were annexed. The people who did not send back their information were not annexed. That lot happens to own to somebody that doesn't live there, so they didn't send their approval back, and it wasn't annexed. So when that parcel was purchased, it needed to be annexed in, and I didn't quite, and so after when I checked into it, I found out that we were a low-density housing designation. That really surprised me. I was in the description up there, it discussed a 1-acre parcel with 6 units available on it. This new information now says just a 2-unit on 1 acre, but quite honestly, we bought that house that we live in 26 years ago, and it was designated in the county as single family, and for many years, I'm sure, was designated until 2016 as single family. Once I found out that this had happened, I got to thinking about all sorts of other areas within Branson that would also be very surprised to find out that their neighborhoods are not designated single family. The main reason we've kind of dug into this is because of what's happened with the property behind us and that developer buying a lot in our neighborhood. We were never contacted and made aware that these changes were being made. And it's really not right for some, in my opinion, for changes like that to go through without contacting anybody and getting input on something that is as important and meaningful to us in our neighborhood. There's only 8 lots left. The last thing, we don't want people to be able to, our covenants state that single-family homes are to be built. The city code should reflect the same requirement so new purchasers don't pick and choose which rule they go by. They could say basically, the city allows for the uses that are listed up here, and POA, you can sue me. I really believe that will happen if, in certain instances where they don't care, but if the city has the same designation as the covenant, I think they will resist trying to buck both. So I'm here to request a single-family district to be created and that all neighborhoods that were zoned that way in the past when people bought their houses 25 years ago, it either be grandfathered or allow them to also come and make the change from a low density to a single family residence. And I think it's really, really important. The second thing that I want to touch on is the annexation review of when things are annexed into the city. And one of the things that Alderman Dennup touched on was the fact that when the property adjacent to us was defiled of all of its trees and the county was called, they basically threw their hands up. The city basically said that it was in the county and they had no jurisdiction. So I want to give you a quick review on that property because it goes way back and a lot of people didn't pay any attention to it. But in June of 2006, a development was, an application for the development was filed by Dwight and Linda Sprague and the developer, Dan Ruda. In September 11th of 2006, the application was approved with a 50-foot buffer between Country Bluff Estates and Fountains of Fall Creek. So there was a 50-foot buffer the whole way down our property, the difference between all the way from Fall Creek all the way down to the bluff. And that particular requirement had to be agreed to for the commissioners, the county commissioners, to approve that development. That requirement stood all the way through until you guys annexed them. Nobody really looked into it much until I decided I wanted to know what was really going on. So I pulled all the documents I could from Forsyth and found these documents that prove that that 50-foot buffer should have been absolutely required from the developer. There was also, so that ran through 2006, and then there was no activity on the property for 2.5 years. In 2009, they resurrected the plan again and brought it to the county commissioners. They denied it, and then it was reapplied for, and it was accepted, and then again, they didn't do anything in 2009 until 2019. So for 10 years, that property sat there, and nothing was really done to it. And then on January 6th of 2020, there was a permitting certification from the developer with a single polygon indicating a disturbance request, and it was for 10 acres. They promised to have a SWIP plan developed, and on January 27th, the developer applied for a land disturbance permit and the demo began. That permit in the county was for 10 acres. The developer took all of the whole 52 acres worth of trees down with a 10-acre permit. We were told that it didn't make any difference that he did that because he could have gone over and extended it to the 52 acres, but he didn't do that. He just went ahead and took all the trees down and didn't leave a buffer. For first half of our road, there is absolutely no buffer. And from the sign, the Country Bluff sign down into our development, there's about a 20 to 25-foot buffer. And it was gone. When we tried to call the city, once again, we were told it's not in the city, we can't do anything about it. When we went to the county just basically threw their hands up and said, he can do whatever he wants, it's his land. So now we have what we've got back there, and nobody is paying any attention to it or really cares that we now don't have the buffer that we need. And that's why it's important to have that in what she brought up about the addition of the C, which says that from the time that somebody puts in an annexation request to when they finally gets annexed, they shouldn't be able to touch that property. He quite honestly took all the trees down while it was in the county because he didn't want to have to pay for the cost of the trees being taken down. That would have been hugely expensive. So the minute he got signed off on it, he went like crazy. He was out there from 7 in the morning till dark, taking down as many trees as they could possibly take down. And then they did it for 2 weeks, and then he needed an extension because he didn't have it all done yet. So he goes back to the city and he asks for then extension on the annexation. And he got it. So then he takes the rest of it, pulls it all together, burns it all up, and that's why it is where it's at. Then it was finally annexed. That needs to be looked at. You know, the city should have been able to go back to the county and say, wait a minute, let me see what's being annexed here. Let's look at all the documentation. This documentation would have proven that he should have left the 50-foot buffer and that he only had a 10-acre disturbance permit. And at that point, the city shouldn't have allowed him to be annexed until he fixed the problems that he had. And you guys in planning and zoning have to help us to do those things. So that's those are the two big things that I wanted to bring up. I just do have a question. I don't understand what the big pushback is to a single-family zone. I don't understand why that just can't be added. If you want low density, have low density, but if you want to have, like we do, or Ruth's subdivision, if we want that designation and we come to you guys and say, please give us that designation, I'm not understanding why that can't be easily taken care of. Just make one more district that's available for those subdivisions that's their desire. And like I said, mostly because we need to be in sync with our covenants and the city requirement, because I don't want somebody saying, I don't care, the city says it's okay. So you guys just sue us, because I think that can happen. The other question I have is on these land disturbance. We've met sometimes on land disturbance permitting, and that they need to send in their plans. Are those plans that they send in, are they in stone, or are they just a plan and then whatever happens to happen, happens? Because I see that from our meetings that when we ask the developer exactly what he's going to build, he says he's not sure. That, well, we've kind of got it going, but, you know, it's dictated by the economy. Well, I don't know that it makes much sense to annex things and allow permits for building if they don't know what they're building. And they're not going to allow the people around to know what those plans are. So that was my other question on that. And I guess that's it. Thank you for listening to me. I'm sorry, I'm very nervous.
State your name, address, and then we'll need you to sign in as well, please.
Hi, my name is Gail Westbrook, and I'm the president of the Country Bluff Estates POA. Thank you for listening and taking the time.
We need your address too. if
And
you
my
don't mind.
address is 105 Country Bluff Court.
Thank you.
I'm going to be pretty brief, but I was kind of surprised that we skipped over 94.6, the common procedures, and maybe that's, the part that you're, thank you. There's a section here missing, as you can see. But anyway, that's called common procedures.
There were
It address-
there were no changes to that section. That's why it wasn't included.
Right. Well, I'm going to ask for some changes.
Can you pull the mic closer to you so we can hear you?
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things with the common procedures that is not addressed is when land is in a shallow state. So meaning that, like, for instance, what concerns us is the property next door to Country Bluff Estates. And right now, nothing is being done. Nothing's being done, and all those trees have been, torn down, and the land literally raped of trees. And it was a horrible sight, and other than being emotional about that, about the fact that they did get all taken down and burned for days upon weeks on end, and everybody had to watch that destruction, and nobody did anything about it. Well, now, nobody's doing anything about it either, and now the water runoff is coming down and it's flooding. And when brought up to this developer that this is happening, he said, well, not all that water's mine. I'm not creating all that water. Well, he's right. He's not creating all of it, but he's certainly creating an abundance of it. And what's happening is it's coming across our neighborhood and into some of the residents that live there, and it's flooding their whole lots. And it's bringing debris along with it. And so we not only did we have to put up with the fact that nothing was being done while this was happening between city and county, and y'all have to do your thing, and I understand that, but now we're having to put up with that as well. And something has to give. And in these common procedures, it talks about rainwater runoff and stuff, but it doesn't say anything about fallow state. Fallow state. And I'm nervous too, Susie, I understand. But at any rate, I really do believe that needs to be addressed. And fines need to be imposed and whatever. And now that lot, or that land, is nothing but weeds, noxious weeds. And they're tall, and they're ugly, and they're harmful. So basically, that is what I wanted to talk about. And I think that some of this stuff ought to be addressed in a pre-annexation meeting so that this doesn't occur to other people and other residents. And like Ms. Sutherland said, single-family residents, that needs to be addressed as well. That's all I have. Come on up, Cherry.
Thank you.
Hey, Joel, real quick while Cherry's coming up. So I was writing down some quotes here while we were talking, and you had said that, that kind of the goal within the whole 2030 framework was, quote, provide greater housing flexibility and options. So is it your your opinion as staff that adding what they're talking about, adding, single family as a designation, is it your opinion that would do the opposite of what what I have you quoted here? In other words, are you saying that would limit housing flexibility and options?
Yes, and it would be going backwards. So we we basically created a code as a community based around density. And that's why we have the residential districts of low, medium, and high, was to have a new description, a new way of handling residential, whereas the old code was based on one family, two family, multiple family. So we were trying very, very consciously to move away from that into a new way of doing residential districts. So to go back and to add a one family or single family district to that density lineup, I think would be the wrong way to deal with it. It'd be my opinion, if you're asking that, to simply look at limiting the permitted uses in the low density residential district to get it to where single family residential would be the primary and only use. Yeah, very similar to nightly rentals.
My name is Cherry Webster. I live at 118 Country Bluff Drive. I'd like to add a little bit to everything here. Susie talked about, she gave you kind of a review of what went on. And one of the things that I'd like to add to that is that when the property, the 52-acre parcel that's behind Country Bluff was annexed in, we didn't find out until 2.5 months later that it was an annexation plan of intent. And so it bypassed the planning and zoning procedure where it would be changed from agriculture to whatever the developer wanted. And when I look at your 9434 annexation, I just wonder, the verbiage that you have here is you're changing it from, it'll come in as agriculture unless indicated in the plan of intent under an involuntary annexation. I'm curious what the impetus is behind that, because if you're changing it to involuntary now, then that means a plan of intent applied to both voluntary and involuntary previously. And if that's the case, then where in the city code are the instructions that tells the city planning staff how to grant the kind of zoning that the developer should get? How do you switch it from give them comparable city zoning to what they were already awarded in the county? And I couldn't find those instructions anywhere in the city code. So I just wonder, the thought occurred to me, well, does this changing this plan of intent for just an involuntary annexation, was that the intent all along of the code? That it was always supposed to be involuntary annexation? That right now all you're doing is just clarifying it, changing the language? And if that's the case, the other thought that came to me was, what did the city do last year? Did you do something illegal? But at any rate, this new paragraph, changing it to involuntary annexation, is great. Had this verbiage been there last year in February the 11th, 2020, we wouldn't be having this problem here. The developer's attorney wouldn't have found that loophole. And then we find out 2 months after it's annexed in May, we find out in the end of July. Actually, we didn't find out until August. We missed the first reading of the zoning hearing because it went to the Board of Aldermen. It didn't go to the Planning Commission. We've been blindsided so many times on this that it got to the point where we had to scour the agendas every week, every 2 weeks to see, is there something coming up that is applicable to that developer next door? Finally, nextdoor.com, Melody Pettit started posting the agenda items, and that's great, but I will say that this meeting was not posted on nextdoor.com. And it was the city back in 2015 that went around to all the 23 neighborhoods in the city and had neighborhood meetings where they tried to build relationships between the various departments in the city and the communities. And that was great. And they turned us all on to nextdoor.com. Our neighborhood's been using that for 6 years now. But there was nothing about this meeting on nextdoor.com. And you might want to suggest that Melody Pettit put out a notice for the Planning and Zoning Commission hearings and not just the Board of Aldermen meetings. In addition to that, when I look back here, I see 6 people from Country Bluff Estates. Where are the other 22 neighborhoods? Why aren't they here talking about the single-family zoning? I guarantee you they know nothing about it. It's just like the pet ordinance. Nobody knew anything about it. It's like you're trying to ram the code down our throats, make these laws that nobody has had a chance to talk about. But thank goodness for elections. We got some new people on the Board of Aldermen and the mayor, and we had a hearing for the pet ordinance in each of the 3 wards so that people got to come and speak about it. I think it'd be a real good idea if Melody Pettit put a notice on nextdoor.com and say, hey, the Planning Commission postponed their hearing, and one of the major topics was, do you still live in a single-family detached neighborhood? Because you might not anymore. But you might need to change the description, because if you go and look at the agenda item, Joel, I don't know if you have that, not this document that you've been scrolling through, but the agenda. There's like a summary list. Do you have that one you can pull up?
We all have the agenda in front of us.
Okay, go down to the sentence where it's talking about eliminating the single-family zone district. How do you read it?
Yeah, I
It doesn't
hate to
say anything
interrupt the
about.
speaker, but I think we're far afield from what we were discussing in terms of our item tonight that we were voting on. And I appreciate the comments. I'm only speaking for myself here. I appreciate the comments, but you've raised some things that are very disturbing. Your accusations that something illegal has gone on.
I just
and
asked the
that things
question.
are- It's what you said, and that things are
No,
being.
I just asked.
I agree.
Yeah.
I just asked.
100%.
I believe that perhaps a meeting between staff and this citizen might be in order, but I don't see that this is appropriate conversation for our board at this time.
Well, I apologize
wanna
if I've
suggest
offended
that-
you on that. I apologize. And we have had a community meeting, our whole community, with 9 city officials on May the 13th.
I can see that you all are very aggrieved in what's going on in your neighborhood, and I appreciate that, but I haven't been personally involved in that myself. I'm sure that this commission has on and off, but again, I don't want to speak for the commission. I'm only speaking for myself. I was very eager to hear your comments about what we're discussing tonight.
I do
'cause
have
think it's-
comments about those, and I apologize for offending you. I'm not accusing you of doing anything illegal, that just the thought comes to me that, I guess I'm just maybe a little too blunt, but if you're changing this wording to accommodate only involuntary annexation, then you have to look at what about voluntary annexation? And and the question that you should be having, I would think in your mind, is what's the impetus behind this wording? And that's a discussion that the commission might want to have.
I think that's
behind the
precisely why
scenes.
we asked to have it postponed, so we
Okay.
can all have more discussion about
But we
the
have a
entire-
lot of input on additional things that we would like you to consider. For example, I'm not quite sure that the wording, Ruth, that you added for, you wanted to add a C, 9434C. And you said something about all annexation agreements that the applicant has to agree that there's no clearing from the date of, and then I'm not sure what you said there.
The date of
The document, date of application.
The date it was submitted for application
Okay.
until it's approved.
Well, the thing is, the way B is worded right here, the developer did exactly that. The developer did not apply for
B,
a land disturbance permit with the city, until after the trees had been completely destroyed.
B is a new wording for that.
Yes,
Joel? So it was not in the code at the time.
I know, but even if it had been, he followed it. He had destroyed all of the trees, and the property had been completely annexed by May the 12th, and it wasn't until the first week of June that the developer applied for a land disturbance permit with the city. He previously had a land disturbance permit with the DNR from January 2020 and from the county. So what really, this still leaves a big loophole. The annexation, involuntary annexation closes the one loophole, but the other one is still there. If the developer did all of his destruction while he was still in the county, and so the new wording for your proposed C would have to accommodate it would have to restrict the developer from doing or getting any permits from the county as well. And I don't know how you word that. I don't know how you can make that restriction, but that's what would have to occur. In the case for the property beside us, the developer just happened to have already applied for the annexation, and on the night of the first reading, it got approved, and the next morning, he started the destruction of the trees. By the time he finished, and he got 2 extensions for 2.5 months, 2.5 months, the city allowed him to continue with the land disturbance before it came into final annexation the middle of May. So what you've proposed here in B wouldn't have changed that. That same scenario could be repeated again. And so you really kind of need a pre-annexation agreement that says they can't disturb the property at all, even when they're in the county. And I don't know how you would word that, but that would be the only way to close that loophole.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, we have no legal authority to do that. I think that's the key problem here.
Yep, that's the problem.
And we have tried to explain this repeatedly on this specific issue. We can only control what's within our legal boundaries, except for one little loophole, and that is with regards to quarantine laws. We can go
Right.
5 miles outside the city. That's it. That's the only authority that our state legislature has afforded us.
Understood.
Yeah, it's a dilemma. And so the developer in our case, he could have just stripped the land before he even made an application. A future developer could strip the land and then come to you and say, well, I want to develop this property now. And you don't have any say-so on the land disturbance.
And unless they're annexed, we still won't.
Right. So I don't know how you close that loophole, but that loophole has been the major problem behind everything we've had, all the issues between Country Bluff and the developer, especially the stormwater runoff. Because when he was annexed on May the 12th, that was it. The development stopped. There was no more land disturbance. On the first week of June, he applied for a city land disturbance permit. It was approved on July the 6th. It was active for 6 months until January the 2nd of this year. And that whole 6-month period of time when there was additional stormwater runoff, the city did nothing. They just said, well, Joel told us in October, well, you can't do anything without when there's not an active development. There's not active development on the site. Well, if you go back and look at 9410, where it says land disturbance, line 44, it says purpose. You don't have any changes there, but let me just read to you what the purpose says. It says the purpose of this article is to control soil erosion on land that is undergoing development. Define undergoing development. Is that the same thing as active development that Joel used? If that's the case, then perhaps you can change the code so that it accommodates the fallow state that we've been experiencing for the last 17 months. Because you had the land disturbance permit. The documentation that supported that land disturbance permit was the stormwater pollution prevention plan. So, and he had a good plan, but he didn't implement it. He didn't implement it when he was in the county, and he didn't implement it when he came into the city. And the only help that our community ever got was from the DNR. During the 2-week time frame that he was knocking down all the trees, one of the neighbors called the DNR, and the DNR did an unannounced inspection on February 24th, and he was out of compliance with the Missouri Clean Water Law. It took him until the 1st of May.
I don't mean to interrupt, but what Ms. Webster's talking about is not on the agenda tonight.
Understood.
So we need to focus directly on changes to this and nothing else.
Well, I would
again,
suggest that,
So, Mr. Chair, just,
She is making a suggested change to something that we did not
right,
have on there. That's why I'm listening.
your purpose should be, the purpose under 9410 should be modified. This undergoing development needs to be defined. Does it just mean you've got a construction permit that's approved? Because the developer had a construction permit application, but it wasn't approved. It was just a land disturbance that was approved.
And this is just me guessing on this. I'm just trying to clarify a little from my side. It would be very difficult for, I believe, the city to enforce that when the damage had already been done prior to the annexation and the county. And I don't see any way possible for the city to have been able to adjust that. And even if we were to change code, I don't think that would have resolved the issue.
I'm not sure either. And the thing is, there are 4 of you up there that I don't know you, and I have a feeling you don't know anything about what's been going on at Country Bluff and the development over there. The other 4 of you do know what's going on to varying degrees, and it's been a nightmare for 17 months now, and we're still dealing with it because every time we come to the city, it's, oh, well, we can't do anything. But I will say this, that we did have a meeting May 13th with the 9 officials, the staff and elected officials, and we saw some changes. We saw the MS4 permit coordinator be moved from Public Works to planning. I assume that gives stormwater runoff a little more visibility to the city, the staff and the aldermen. That's a good thing. I also found out on June the 1st that the MS4, of the first part of June, that the MS4 coordinator now has the ability, he's been deputized to write citations when he inspects properties. I've been told that he has 30 properties to inspect. We're in the top 10. I don't know that we've been inspected yet, but then the question becomes, but you don't have an active land disturbance permit anymore. What are you inspecting?
Again, can we try to stay on topic here,
Okay.
please?
All right.
May I ask, have you been to the county? Have you been to the county commission about this?
We went to the county during the tree destroying process.
Have you been back since? Because this is their purview, not ours, am I right?
Well, that's the point that Ruth Denham made. Back in the county, when he had an original permit to remove the trees for land disturbance for 10 acres, I called the county director of planning when he hit about 30 acres, and the guy said it's his property and do whatever he wants. All he has to do is update the paperwork. Well, to my knowledge, you never updated the paperwork. And I understand that's not your problem, but to date.
Excuse me, I don't mean to insinuate it isn't our problem.
Yeah.
I'm only saying it's not our purview. We don't have
Yeah.
any say
And you can't do
whatsoever
anything
over
about
what
it.
the county does.
And you can't do anything
So
about
we can
it.
make all the codes we want within the city, but the county does not have to
Well,
conform to our codes
right.
unless they're within the city limits.
But in your land disturbance, the code here, it talks about inspection reports, which includes stormwater inspection and whether or not you need stormwater detention. And one of the elements that the developer had as part of his SWIP was a 200-foot by 200-foot filter basin. It's yet to be put in. He didn't bother to put in his hydro seeding until the DNR requested it 15 months later, back in April of this year. So I'm probably explaining a lot more because you don't know what's been going on the last 15 months, 17 months like other 4 people have. But I'm trying to give you some background that there's a problem when you're trying to allow annexation in and you don't want a developer to be able to just destroy land before they get into the city limits. And what happened last year with this 2.5 months of postponing the second reading not only allowed him to do this, to do the damage, it facilitated it. The city actually facilitated his ability to go out, spend 8 weeks scooping up 40 acres of forest into burn pile and burn them on site. We lived under ash for over a month because he was burning them 24 hours a day.
This is also above this wouldn't be anything that we could have dealt with. This would have been the Board of Aldermen, I'm understanding, if it was brought upon the board.
Right, but your code doesn't allow, right now, the property's in the city limits, it's in a fallow state.
Yep.
And I don't see where your code addresses that fallow state. And so you might want to consider that, and if you're looking at what code you want to update here, you might want to better define undergoing development. Does fallow, is that in between pre-construction and post-construction? And then I don't see any reference in the land disturbance area to the MS4 permit. It's like you've got land disturbance over here, you've got MS4 over here, and they're not exactly talking. And so that's another consideration that you might want to make when you're looking at adjusting code, especially for land disturbance. Where does the MS4 permitting come in? Where does the enforcement come in? Because what we didn't have last year, even after it got annexed in, it wasn't being enforced.
Vice Chairperson, can I ask a quick question of Joel?
Please.
Joel, I've heard numerous times, I believe from commissioners as well as from alderpersons, that there was going to be an attempt to have a meeting with the county on some of these issues. Now, maybe there is no formal process by which, I know there are quorum rules. I know that, if 4 of us went out to Applebee, 5 of us, whatever, then you have to display the minutes of that. You have to do these kind of things, right? Is there any kind of formal process by which this group could have a joint meeting with County P&Z, just to have some discussions and share? Because if there's not, I think we need to know that, because these people have been told countless times that that was going to occur, and I don't know of any time that that has occurred.
We're happy to look into it and see if we can arrange something for you all, if that's your desire, absolutely.
Yeah, that's definitely my desire, and I don't mean to be kind of sharp or anything, but I've heard that exact thing a bunch of times. Can we, if that's an ability that we have as a commissioner, as just one commissioner, I would like to get in the process of scheduling that and actually making that happen, because like I said, these folks have been told that that was going to happen.
And I have one other comment on terms of annexation, and that is when the 52-acre parcel was annexed into the city last year, the decision of record from the Taney County Planning Commission that required the 50-foot buffer, that did not get incorporated into the annexation agreement. And back in October, at the 27th Alderman meeting, I made a request in the public comment period to modify that annexation agreement to incorporate the decision of record from the minutes of the 9/11/2006 Planning Commission meeting. That zoning was based upon the 50-foot buffer, undisturbed vegetation. To date, it is still not in the annexation agreement, and that type of thing should also be incorporated in your zone, in the code here. I don't know which section it should be involved in, but I would think that the planning staff should be required to go to the county, get all county documents, and incorporate whatever decision. I would think their decision of record is not unlike your ordinance that you pass in the city. And that should have been incorporated in, and if you don't have that requirement in your code, now's a good time to put it in there, since you're thinking about changing the code and updating it. If you want to close out some loopholes, that's yet another loophole where we got screwed because the buffer wasn't worked in, and it should have been done. So in summary, what we have seen for the last 17 months is that Fountains on Fall Creek has been a fiasco. It's a case study on how a developer can game the system, and how the county and city can not only let it happen, but facilitate the developer working around county decisions of record, city ordinances requiring zoning hearings, ignoring standard best management practices, and refusing to implement a stormwater pollution prevention plan, and requesting and receiving government funding for all the work, water extension, sewer extension, building construction, to provide utilities to a private development site. That's what we've seen. In addition to that, again, 17 months later, we still have water runoff that absolutely has to be addressed, because the developer is using lot 35 that he bought in our subdivision as his detention pond, instead of putting the filter basin on his own property as his engineer designed his SWIP. So we would ask you to close the loophole of allowing developers, somehow or other, close the loophole that allows them to rape a parcel before it is annexed into the city. We'd also like you to invite the 23 neighborhoods that are in the city of Branson to come and comment on the single-family zoning district, because I think they, like us, would like to know that we live in a single-family neighborhood, and it's going to stay that way. We'd also like you to beef up the enforcement abilities of the city, particularly with the SWIP and with the MS4 permit, and allow some sort of action in your code, put in some action in your code that addresses the fallow state when a parcel is between pre-construction, after pre-construction, and before construction, and before you have an approved construction plan. Because for all we know, that probably could stay the way it is now for another couple of years if he doesn't have the funding. And you don't know that he's going to even apply for federal and state funding with the MHDC this year like he has for the last 2 years. By the time you finish putting in the sewer extension at the end of this year, and the county puts in the water extension, and the county puts in his left turn lanes, he's got all utilities to a property. He has no commitment whatsoever to go back and build that low-income housing development project, and that's the only plan that you have for the parcel. You've allowed him to come in, at 52 acres to come in, and you've only got a 5-acre civil plan. To date, you have no plan for the 52 acres. And that's not reasonable. That's not reasonable at all. We'd also ask that you add a pre-annexation agreement into your code. And I would think that there would be some way that you could establish a standard for a parcel that's in the city limits so that when an annexed parcel comes in, it has to meet those standards. For example, the developer had the same SWIP in the city and the DNR that he submitted to you and got a land disturbance permit from the city. So if you look at the SWIP, you can see that he didn't do it. He didn't follow it. I would think that maybe Mr. Lebec can correct me, but there ought to be some way that you can say, okay, here's the standard, and you haven't even met the standard yet. Come up to the standard, and then we'll give you a land disturbance permit or a general construction permit. But right now, we are dealing with 5-foot-high weeds on the property because he did not implement his SWIP correctly. It specifically stated that last April, when he finished taking down all those trees and burned everything up, he was supposed to hydro-seed it or seed it and straw it. He didn't do either one. He put some seed on it, it washed down to the bottom of the hill, it burned up in June when everything turned dry, and so all we have are weeds. We've got one neighbor here who's allergic to giant ragweed that's growing up all along the border behind the houses. And so what do we do? Do we go to your website and say, okay, your ordinance says you have a noxious weed ordinance. We'd like him to mow it. Well, what's he going to do with the few stormwater erosion measures that are on the property? He's got a few rows of riprap, but to this day, there is not a single erosion measure along the remaining creek boundaries. He destroyed all the other boundaries from the west side to the east side of his property, but the boundaries that do remain, the rainwater is running off of that parcel in front of the riprap. So the riprap is doing nothing. It's coming down from the top of the bluff, which has an elevation of 870 feet.
Hang on. I'm honestly, I want to listen and I want to hear it. I don't think this is the right format right now. We're getting way off topic from where we were at on the agenda. If you have any more comments related to the agenda item, we definitely want to hear them. I will personally give you my cell phone number and you can call me and I'd be happy to listen about this. Because you said that 4 have heard about it, 4 have not.
Right.
Well, I don't agree with you on that. I know a lot more about what's going on and what you're talking about than
Well, that's good, I
So,
think.
But back to what I was saying, if we can stay on this topic with any adjustments to this code, that's all we need to talk about right now.
Well, I understand that and I appreciate that. I think I've exhausted my time and told you most of what I wanted, but I felt there was a need for you to understand what the problems are so that you can translate those into how do you change the code.
And I agree with you, and I understand that, and I know that Ruth and Marshall and I'm not sure who the other two were, have heard. I know they'll be making suggestions related to this stuff. I know that based on what I've heard from you guys, I'll be making some additional suggestions. I'm sure Bob will as well. So we've heard
How
it.
do we make his suggestions to you? Because when I got on the website today, there are no email addresses and no phone numbers for any of you.
I'll be happy to give you both of mine.
What is yours?
Okay, I will give it to you after the meeting
Okay.
because I don't want it to go public.
Oh, you don't want it public? Okay. Well, I thought we're not public.
Well, we're
beyond
on
the-
video
we're
on
beyond the-
YouTube and everything else, so.
All right, okay. All right, thank you very much.
Yep. All I'm going to ask is anybody else that comes up to speak, please give your name, address, and everything, and just try to stay with this. And if it's something related to what somebody has already said.
I'm just going to take 45 seconds.
Perfect,
And
thank
you
you.
can time me, I promise.
No, I'm good, thank you.
My name's Charles Hillis, and I live at 293 Country Bluff Estates. And I wanted to go back to what Ruth Denham had said previously about the single residential area. And all people are really wanting is some protection. And, I mean, this is my first home I've ever owned. It is really disturbing to have a developer sell you that home and property and then turn around and the zoning gets changed, knowing what he's going to do to start with, and that can happen anywhere. They can sell you your home and your property, and then right next door, do everything else they wanted to. And that's all I'm saying is the wording that you were talking about, the protection is what people are looking for. Thank you.
Need you to sign in for us too as well, please. Thank you.
Mr. Chairperson, I just want to be very clear, and I'm not trying to be pointed, I just, again, trying to be clear for the record that by no means was staff suggesting, recommending any change to allow something that was not currently allowed in the low-density residential district.
And that was determined in 2016,
It was
correct?
approved under ordinance number 2016-193, so we're talking 5 years ago.
Right.
That code has been in place for 5 years. There were public hearings at that time with the Planning Commission, with the Board of Aldermen. There was countless outreach as part of the Community Plan 2030 to arrive at that. So again, to clear the record, for anybody listening or paying attention, staff is not recommending to add a use that's not currently not allowed in the low-density residential district.
Understood.
What is the pushback on that? I mean, do you just want it because it's up-to-date verbiage?
I-
Or
I'm-
I'm not quite sure, if people want that to be a code, I'm not quite sure why the city would absolutely, your staff or whoever you're mentioning here, why can't you just add one more level? That for those neighborhoods that want it, it doesn't seem like it should be that hard to me. So I'm just questioning it because I understand you have 2030 or you have whatever, but, you know, maybe forward isn't always better. And maybe there are people who want a single-family thing, and I'm not, so I guess what I'm asking you is what exactly is bad about having the single family?
I, again, want to be clear, we are not pushing back, we're not resisting, we're just sharing our professional opinions, and I'm trying to bring into the record the thousands of people that were involved in the Community Plan 2030 and, you know, the however 20 people that are here tonight. I'm just trying to remind the record that there were a lot of people's opinions that went into that to make this change that has been in place for 5 years. That's all I'm trying to represent.
All right, any additional public comment? No? Well, I would be happy to take a motion for adjournment.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, raise your hand or stand up.